All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Ashley, and thank you all for attending this session as well. It goes without saying that we are in some very strange times, and I appreciate you all taking the time to watch today's web session. Um, so I imagine many of you are working from home as I am, so I apologize in advance if you hear any barking dogs or screaming kids or anything like that. So I'll do my best to work around that. At any rate, I did a similar presentation um, back in the fall in St. Louis. So I'm excited to share this content with all of you via the web. Um, let's see, hopefully everybody's seeing my screen here. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. I am going to do my best to convey to you what Dynamo actually is and some important background information with a few PowerPoint slides. Then I will shelf the PowerPoint and show you what it can do with a live demo. So then once we have a good handle on the basics, we can then move on to some of the things that I think are really cool from a time-saving productivity standpoint, as well as just some pretty darn cool stuff it can do. Now, my goal is that by the end of this presentation, you will have a basic understanding of what Dynamo is, how it can be valuable for you and your team, and what you need to do to start implementing this into your tool set today. If you haven't seen it before, I'm super excited for you because when I first saw this, I knew that everything I ever wanted to do with Revit but couldn't was now all of a sudden possible. I realized that if there was something I could imagine doing, there's a good chance it was achievable with Dynamo. I'm not going to tell you it can do everything, but the possibilities are literally infinite. So after our live demo, I'll then show you some resources available. And of course, I always save time for a little Q&A at the end. So let's see here. We're going to skip brief poll here. Let's go on. Okay, so it always seems logical to start off a presentation with a definition of the topic at hand. In this case, if someone asked me, hey, what is Dynamo? That would be really hard to answer in one or two sentences because Dynamo is so much and it can do an infinite amount of tasks. But I feel like I owe you at least a high-level overview of what we will be talking about before we dive in. So essentially, Dynamo has access to the Revit API, which means that it can utilize and extract data to be manipulated in a way that is not available via the Revit user interface. In a typical workflow, Dynamo is going to take data from some sort of database like Revit, Excel, or even Dynamo itself, then manipulate that data in a meaningful way, and then push it back into Revit, Excel, or some other desired output. So that's what this little diagram down here is all about. All right, let's see what else we got here. So these are some of the things I love about Dynamo. First of all, it can do things with Revit that I couldn't do before. Dynamo enabled access to data stored inside of Revit that users like me had no previous way of accessing. I am sure that there are some programmers out there that didn't have any issues before, but for the average architect, engineer, drafter, or designer, we now have the tool set we needed. The next part about Dynamo that I love is automation. Dynamo can automate tasks for us, and the benefits are threefold here. We can save time, ensure accuracy, and thoroughness of our work. Tasks that would take hours to complete manually can be done in seconds. You no longer have to worry about precision. As an example, if I have to manually enter the same piece of data 1,000 times, there's a great chance I will have a typo in at least a few of those. Now, Dynamo is going to do whatever we tell it to do, so you can avoid precision errors that would occur with repetitive manual entry. The third benefit here is thoroughness. If you needed to manually update a parameter on every column in the project, there's a good chance I could miss or overlook one. However, if I tell Dynamo to do this for me, I can ensure a far superior result. Okay, so I am working under the assumption that most of you have good enough understanding about BIM or building information modeling by now. If not, no big deal. Now, Dynamo is essentially just a tool that will take your BIM data or workflows and make them better. And one of the best parts about that is it comes installed with Revit. So if you have the full version of Revit installed, you already have Dynamo. You could have totally missed this if you weren't looking for it, but there is a button for Dynamo inside of Revit located on the Manage tab. When you click on that, it will launch the application in a separate window. And I wanted to save this part till the end, but since it's totally integrated with Revit, there would be no additional cost as far as the software is concerned. So what else is Dynamo? Well, it's an open source graphical programming platform. Let's break that part down. So open source software is software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. Then there's the graphical or visual programming aspect. If you're not familiar with visual programming, all it means is that you are actually still doing computer programming, except that it lets us author our programs with very user-friendly illustrations on the screen instead of hundreds of lines of text. So in this example on the slide, I was able to create a model of the arch by stringing a few nodes together. And it's very intuitive for people like me with a graphical mindset. It is basically just like taking pieces of a puzzle and arranging them on the screen in front of your face. However, if you are more of a traditional programmer and you prefer thousands of lines of code approach, I have more good news for you. You can totally still do that. In fact, a lot of workflows will actually require Python codes. I do not plan to show anything that will require you to author or edit any Python codes today. Everything I personally work on and plan to show will be totally completed with graphical nodes. So a very cool thing that has grown out of the open source nature of Dynamo is a huge community of collaborators that share knowledge and information for free. Sometimes people have created very useful workflows and grouped them into packages that can be easily found, downloaded, and installed directly from within Dynamo. Most of what I will show you today is out of the box, but I will try to print out, try to point out any nodes from packages if we come across any. In other words, some of the more complicated nodes that required lots of lines of text coding have already been done, and due to the open source nature of Dynamo community, these have been shared with people like me who are not gifted with the hacking superpowers. So who can use Dynamo? Pretty much anyone can use it. I mean, who am I? I'm just a guy, and if I can use it, I think anyone can use it. So maybe you or some of your users don't feel comfortable digging into the Dynamo interface and tinkering around with the nodes and whatnot. Well, that is cool too. That is why we have something called the Dynamo Player. Dynamo Player will allow us to take a script and run it directly from inside Revit with a simple and easy to use interface with fields for any user required input. So I'll be sure to show some Dynamo Player as well. So with that, I think we have enough of a baseline knowledge and we should jump in here. So with that, we will switch over to my Revit screen here. So Dynamo works with a specific file. So I have to pick a file to open with here. This is a good starting point. Let's say I go to, here's a good, this way I don't have to browse. So Dynamo comes with a data set installed, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this data set probably looks pretty familiar, but they've modified it in a couple ways. So what we're going to be working with in this first little demo here is these little model lines. Let me isolate these for you. These little model lines are in here. Grab those just to show you where they are. So we've got these 3 model lines here. I'm going to go back and reset that. So there's one in line with the wall and one up in the middle here. So let's go ahead and open Dynamo. Again, if you've watched some of my previous recordings or webcasts, you know I like using our favorite plumbing consultant here. So we'll go to the Manage tab and look for the Dynamo button right up here. And that will launch Dynamo in a separate window. So it is great to have dual monitors for this. Of course, that would be hard to do for a demo today, so I'll just kind of work this as I can, trying to layer these properly. So this is Dynamo. Like I said, there are some nodes that come samples. So the first one I'm going to open that goes with this data set is Revit Adaptive Components. So let's open that up. And it happened fast, but look what happened now. Because I had this set to run automatically, it placed these trusses into the model. Now, let me move some stuff around here to show you what's going on, and then we'll dissect this a little further. Okay, so we have a little integer slider here that's set to 9. That's the amount of trusses. Let's say that's too many. I can bring the slider down here, and it will automatically adjust the Revit geometry for me. Really got my machine crunching here. Okay, so again, if I let me preface this. So sorry up front if I crash. I would say there's a very high probability we'll have a crash or two, and that will most likely be because I accidentally told Dynamo to do something really stupid. So it's my fault, not Dynamo. If it does happen, we will work around it. Another disclaimer is I'm sure that there are way easier ways to do some of the stuff I'm about to show, but most of this was done on my own with help from the web, and some of these nodes were done a while ago. New nodes have been added to replace groups of nodes. So feel free to point something out if you want. And so let's jump back in here. So let me then take advantage of the next cool thing here. We've got these model lines. These are actually driving the geometry. Now let me show you how that's working. If I click on this model line here and drag its control point up a little bit, watch the screen here and watch those trusses. They automatically adjust to those points. Now, let me break this down for you and tell you how this is happening. So I'll expand Dynamo here. Now, these nodes here selected all three of those model lines, and we've connected them into a list here, and we've grabbed the underlying geometry with this node, and if we hover over it, we can see the list of these nodes. We've taken that list and flattened it. That way, we can see, we can work with these points in the next node here. So what happens now is we're telling it we want to point at each of these parameters. So it's breaking up these lines that were already in here. And then we just keep working our way along here. This node right here, it's called adaptive components by points. So we have to tell it two things. We have to tell it what family we want to use. So we could really use any adaptive component we have loaded in there. And then we need to know what points to use. So it actually adds in the trusses based upon 3 points. Where are the points coming from? Well, those are coming from right here. So we use Dynamo to build the list of the points. This node up here adds, let me unconnect that. We don't even need those lines there because all we really care about is these 3 points to build each one. This is just for graphical purposes for the demo. Okay, so that's the first little lesson. And the great thing about this is this comes installed on your machine. You can actually find this data set. The links to the sample files are all right here. And you could test this out after the webcast on your end. All right, so Dynamo only works with one file at a time. So I'm going to close this one out and go back into Revit here. I think we're done with this for now. Close out of this file and open up a new data set. Now we'll do this the quick way. Totally not the way I would teach people how to do this, but for this, it'll be faster to drag and drop. Okay, so let's say I'm doing some space planning here, and I've got a room layout like a little retail store set up, and I've got all my rooms laid out the way I want them. But let's say while I'm designing and moving walls around, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining my programmed area. So for that, I've created a Dynamo script that will help us do that. So let's open that up. Okay, so this was set to run. Down here, a lot of nodes, you can have them set to automatic. So whenever you launch it, it automatically pulls data from Revit, does something with it, and spits it back into Revit. You could also switch it to manual, and then you click the run button to send it in. So let's see what's going on here. You know what? I have a better idea. I'll show it inside of Revit. So let's say as I'm designing here, everything looks good, but I decide I need to shift this wall over. So I move it, and now I've got some issues here. So the way I built this, red means I don't have enough space, green means I have too much, and this little blue override, I guess it kind of turned out purple. That means it's within my criteria. So let's see what happens if I drag this back. Once I get into an acceptable position, it goes back to normal. So let's see how this is working. So the first thing I was doing was getting all room categories, or the room category, getting all the elements, so all the rooms. This shows me which rooms by their model ID have been selected. And now I'm taking that list of rooms and I'm doing something with it. I'm getting parameter values for the ones I need. So up here, I have a field for desired square footage. You didn't see that in Revit. You know what? I'll show it to you. If I click on one of these rooms, we've got desired square footage 225 and actual area 225.23. So let's go back into Dynamo here. So what I've done with these parameters, we got area here, desired square footage. I've built in a tolerance. So if I get within plus or minus 10%, so I'm taking the number, multiplying it by 0.9 or 1.1, and for the area, I just need the actual values. So I'm then taking those and building, it gets a little complicated here, but essentially all I'm doing is just filtering them and applying color overrides to what I need. So here's my color values. These are the nodes that actually take the element and push the color back in, and the color will be determined by how those rooms meet whatever criteria I've settled on. So let's take another look here. I think that's pretty much good for this one. Gonna X out of that. You know what? There was one other thing I wanted to show you with that. Open that back up. So you might have noticed that typically these are shown in blue. I have a reset node here that will take all those elements and reset the color. This was from the Clockwork package, so that doesn't come out of the box. But yeah, now while I'm bringing it up, let's talk a little bit about the packages. Any packages that you've downloaded will be listed as add-ons down here. Anything I'm showing today will be Clockwork, DynaMaps, or Rhythm. Those can be found by clicking on packages, search for a package, and then you just do a search, click download. You don't need to restart Dynamo or Revit. They just come installed and ready to use. So I'm not going to save this, so I don't need to do a reset. So I'll close out of this file. The next thing I want to show everyone, this one is really cool. This is called DynaMaps. So for this, I'm just starting a new project from the architectural template this time. And 1 second here. Okay, so DynaMaps. All right, let's go in here. Manage Dynamo. And we can build this ourselves here. So I'll click New to start a new workspace. And this one works a little differently. First thing you do is go up here to View, click on DynaMaps, and it opens this little interface here. Got a little map. I'm gonna zoom into my area here, somewhere where I know that there's some data in here that we can pull. All right, so now I go to Push to Dynamo. X out of there. And we've got these DynaMaps nodes. So if I find the one I'm looking for under buildings, let's say I want the building footprint surfaces, and I bring that over here. It automatically takes that data and puts them in here. So I have kind of like a figure ground map of all the buildings that are in here. So, let's just say we're starting a project and we just want some site context. We can actually very quickly extrude these surfaces. So let me show you how to do that. I've got a node over here called Surface Thicken. And to find that node, I just start typing in here. If I could type, there it is. Thicken surface. So I take the surfaces, put it in here. Now I need to tell it how much I want it to thicken. The default is probably 1 or 1 foot. So what I can do is double click inside here and say I want it to be 20 feet. Type that in, and you'll notice that it made this surface 20 feet thick. But let me point something out here. What we have so far is just Dynamo geometry. This is not real geometry in your model. It's just kind of like a little wireframe image of what geometry exists inside of Dynamo. If I were to close Dynamo, this stuff would eventually go away. And let me point out something else too. If I go into a section view or an elevation, when I thickened it symmetrically by the surface. So I can go back into Dynamo and clean that up real quickly. So what I can do is create another new node here and say x divided by y. Or no, x divided by 2. That makes sense. And then save this for later, because what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to turn this Dynamo geometry into real geometry with something called import. Import geometry. There it is. But before I import it, what I needed to do was move it up. So I've got a geometry translate node. So here's all I'm doing. I'm just taking information from one side of my screen, feeding it across, and then putting some data back into Revit. So I'll take the solid here. There's my geometry. And I need to offset it in the Z direction. That's where I'm taking the thickness of 20, dividing it by 2 for 10, and then telling it to move it up 10 feet. And you saw that bump up. Now when I feed this in here, let's go into a 3D view. You can see the actual geometry here and the Dynamo geometry. We can turn off the Dynamo geometry by saying hide preview. And now we're just seeing the imported geometry. So let's go to a floor plan. Maybe I'm just doing a real quick site feasibility study. So yeah, forgive me here. We're just doing a crude little model. All right, so what if I drop a camera in here? And very quickly, I've got some site context. So I can use my walk tool. I'm gonna walk through here. And see what my proposed building is gonna look like with just a little bit of site context. Nothing crazy. But you saw how quickly that came together. Very little effort on my part, and then it's good to go. So let's do some practical stuff as well. I'm going to close this one out. And for the next one, one of my favorite things is the batch family upgrader. I'm going to save that one. Let's do the sheet list first. All right, so let's say I've got a file here. I'll just create a new one. So this happens a lot of times. You'll be working on your project and you won't have all the sheets created, but you might have an Excel spreadsheet from either internal or your consultants that has all the sheet names and numbers listed. Now, if you have them in Excel, you can use Dynamo to get these in. So I'm going to show you how that's going to work. So again, look at my sheets here. There's nothing listed under sheets. Let's go ahead to manage, launch Dynamo. And find the correct node here. All right, so that one didn't run because I had it set to manual, which is good because I want to show it to you before we do it. So file path here browses to where I have my Excel spreadsheet. In fact, I'll show you where it is here. There's my sheets list. I'm not going to bother opening up Excel, but it's in there. Okay. Then you take the file from that path. That brings the Excel sheet, brings in the data. You can tell it which sheet. I'm talking Excel sheet. So whatever you've named it, bring that in. Now it'll grab it and transpose it. So let's run it. But before I run it, I want you to keep your eyes down here on the sheets list. So click the run button. Just takes a second or two. And there we go. It's done. Let's go back into Revit here. Here's our sheet list. All done for us. if I go back into that Dynamo script, I'll finish walking you through that. So again, it found all the data that I wanted from that sheet. We've got a whole list here, but in order to use it in a meaningful way, I had to transpose it. So now I have a list of sheet numbers and a list of sheet names. Then I take the first list here and the second list here and use this node to push them back into Revit. So it needs to know the sheet name that's coming from up here. Again, that's list 1 from this list. And then sheet number, which is from this list, which is 0 from this list. And then we chose a title block that was loaded into the project, and I had to put one view on one of the sheets in order to get it to run. So I love that. One of my favorite things here. Okay, so let's close out of that. And let's do another one here. So the new software is already starting to come out for 21. So you're going to start seeing that. You're probably getting a lot of emails now. I haven't seen one for Revit. I don't have a release date yet for Revit, but inevitably you're going to want to do a batch upgrade on all of your old Revit family content. So what you're going to do is use this free Dynamo node that comes with one of the packages. It's going to batch upgrade it for you. So just open up any project file. That will get us into Revit, and we can open Dynamo. And let's take a look at our folder here. So let's say here's our directory of Revit families we want to upgrade. You can see I've got them all broken down. I've got a whole bunch of files here, Revit families. There's also some Revit projects in here, but we're just going to upgrade the families. So if I go to new node, I'm going to type in batch upgrade. There it is. It's from the Rhythm package. And I'll get a directory path. So I'll type in directory. That brings up this node, which will allow me to click the browse button and find where I've saved these. So this is kind of a resource hog, but we'll let it do it. We have some time here. All right. There it is. All right, so we'll click on that, say OK, and then as soon as I connect this, it's going to run. So we've got a little window here upgrading this. Almost done here. So in the background, what it's doing is it's literally opening up each file in the old or in the new version, opening and saving. That's all it's doing. So instead of having to do this manually for every file, it's just taking half a second to do it for each one. And then you can even find out what was successfully upgraded and what wasn't. I'm guessing because there were non-Revit families in here, I'm getting this little error with warnings, but when I go back in here, you can see that anything that was a Revit family has now been upgraded with today's date and time. The other nice thing about this is it deleted the backup files, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so we did batch upgrade. Let's talk a little bit about the Dynamo Player. So to do Dynamo Player, we need to X out of Dynamo. And this is the one that can be easily used by any of your users with almost no experience whatsoever. So for this one, I'm going to show you a node that had yeah, let me open up a file here that I've already started. Let's see here. Okay, so let's say I've got a sheet list here. This is a structural template file. Maybe I had an intern filling out my sheet list and they used all lowercase. Well, let's go ahead and launch Dynamo Player. And here's your Dynamo Player. It's got a bunch of nodes already in here out of the box ready for you to use. And the node down here, update sheet names to uppercase. Keep your eyes over here. When I click the play button up here, click play. It just runs, and let me kill Excel here. Okay. So it runs for you and it's done. All the users will have to do is click play. On the background, what's happening is you take a Dynamo node, put it in this folder, whatever directory this is, and it'll show up in here. Now, some nodes require user input. Let's try one of those next. So if I go to maybe a south elevation view, I've got my levels in here. And one of the great things about Dynamo is it automates tasks. So here is one great way to automate level creation. So in this one, instead of clicking play, click the edit inputs button here. And now you can say, all right, well, how many levels do I need in this project? Well, let's say, oh, that's way too many. Let's do like 26. We're going to do a 10-foot floor to floor height. Click select here. Click on level 2. And then click play. And there you've got all your levels created for you. Beautiful. Okay, so another thing that you might have noticed is the internal origin, which had been exposed. We actually have a node built in for that too. For any projects that you had before and then you upgraded to the latest point release, which is 20.2, you can run this node here, turn off internal origin, play that, and it'll turn them off for you. Okay, now how's this kind of working? Let me go back to this one. If I click the edit button for the levels node, it's actually going to open it up, and let's break it down. So the inputs are all here. So remember how we had to tell it the floor to floor height? If I right click on that, that node is just set to is input. That's how it knows to show up as input over here. That's all that's happening. This node was saved and dumped into that folder that I already showed you, and that's pretty much all there was to it. All right, let's we doing on time here? Yeah, you know what? I think we've got some time to squeeze in one last really good one here. So I'm going to close out of the player, close out of this project. I'm going to create another new template or new file from the architectural project. So one of my favorite things about this is for a long time I had this problem of, hey, you know, I'm doing a rendering and I want to show a background of just some random trees, and no matter what I do, it just doesn't look organic enough. It just, I couldn't get it to look right. It always looked like, you know, just not the way I wanted. And now with Dynamo, I was able to kind of use it to figure out how to do this on my own. So let me run through this for you. Now, let's open Dynamo. So manage. I think we already have it open actually. Okay. So we'll do new node. We're going to start from scratch and build this together. So what do I need to do? Well, what I need to do is put in some trees. So there's a node for family instance by point. There it is, by point family instance. So what information is it asking for? Well, it's asking for the family type and it's asking for a point. Now, okay, that's fine. Let's find the family type. So there's a node here for family types. This allows me to find any family types loaded into the project. In this case, I've got maybe, we'll just choose a tree really quick here, but I also need a point. So we've got a node here for point by coordinates. And it actually added a point there at the origin. The default will be 0, 0, 0. So I can feed this in here, and feed this in here, and let's see what happened. It added a tree into the software. But I don't want just one tree. I want a lot of trees. So I could do this if I just wanted like a regular grid. You could do something like this. You could do a sequence of points. If I double click here, let's say I want to start at 0, dot, dot, maybe I want to go to 100, and then jump by 20 feet. That gives me a sequence of numbers, 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Let's feed that into the X and Y. Now, that's just giving me a line of points. I can change the lacing here to cross product, and now I've got a grid of them. Let's take a look at that. So if we wanted, we could do something like this. But back to what I was saying before, I wanted something that was going to be a little more random and organic. Let me something here. All right, so I think in the interest of time, I'm going to do the more complex one. So let me now show you. So I have two issues here. It's not organic looking enough, and I want to be able to do more than just one type of tree. I want it to be really kind of random. So I'm going to switch this off. I'm going to do lacing shortest here. Get rid of those nodes and kind of think a little differently here. So for my points, I'm going to give myself some space. Type in integer here. That brings up this integer slider. So we're going to call this amount of trees that we want. I could even double click inside here and say amount of trees. Click this down arrow. So minimum of 0, I could change that to 1. Maximum, maybe 1,000. It's going to step by 1. So when I move this slider, I can get any number of trees that I need. Okay, so what am I going to do with that integer for amount of trees? Well, I need a random list of integers, because that's really what I'm after here. I want to randomize this. So I've got a node here called math random, and maybe I want to feed that in here, and I'll show you what happens. I get a list of 547 random decimal points. So that's great. I can use that. I just double click to put in a new code block here. I can put a variable, say x times maybe 500, whatever I want my length to be here. Now let's look at this list. So these will be my kind of x coordinates, these random points out here, anywhere from 0 to 500 feet in my project. So I need variables for y too. So I can select those two, hit the control key, copy them down, and now I've doubled this. So I've got 2 here. All right, so I can feed this into the x. You know what? I'm gonna disconnect that. Feed this into the x, feed this into the y. And here's a very beautiful list of points here. Maybe I can orbit this around so you guys can see it. So it's just a random, as random as possible area that I can get of those points. So what am I going to do with that now? Well, I need to tell Dynamo what to do with those points. So I said I don't want just this one family type. I want to grab a whole lot of different trees. So maybe I think about this a little differently. I can keep this in here, but let's do categories. So for every category under the planting Revit category, speed this up here. Planting. Now I want to get, like, that's great. That's great. I've got this category for planting. What do I do with it? Well, I want to extract all of the family types of that category. This node came from Clockwork, one of those free packages. So category, feed that in here, and there it is, a list of every single family type of tree that I've got in there. Okay, again, so that's all well and good. What do I want to do now? So this is where we have to start thinking how we want to build this list here. So I have a list of trees and I have a list of points. How do I want to marry them together? Well, I want to randomize this list too, and I need to know how many total items I need. So the total items I need, I already know, it's back here. So what I can do is get a list count of the amount of trees I've got. Sometimes they don't come up right away. Let's count. There it is. So I'll get my list count here, 18, and maybe I'll just do a little code block here. X times y. And you see it automatically puts those inputs in here. So I'll do the total number for my x variable. Hang on a second. 1 second here. Feed that in there, and then divide it by this. This tells me I did multiply. I want to do it divided by. So that tells me how many times I need to repeat this list. But I don't want to repeat it 30 times. I want to round it. So we'll just round it to the nearest integer. And then we'll make a list of repeated items here. So I can take my original list, feed that in here, and repeat it. So now look at this. I've got all the families listed in here, and I have the exact amount that I need. But it's now I've got a list of list, so I need to flatten it so I get everything in the root list. And now you can see, there we go. Beautiful. Okay, so I've got all the list here, but it's not random yet. Luckily for us, there's something that we can do to shuffle. So now here's our list of 540 trees. And I can go back to this original node here, family instance by point. I've already got the points. Now I need the list of trees to use. So I can push that in there for the family type. And there we go. I've got this kind of organic looking area of trees in my project. So with that, I think we're right at the hour here. I didn't leave much time for Q&A, but I did, before we wrap up, I did want to show you some resources here. So the first thing you'll need, let me step back a minute. So what helped me learn the software? The first couple of things you need, you might already have. The most important is just the desire to learn it. Then the next is just a few minutes. That's all it takes to get started. A good place to start is to run through the Dynamo primer. It's free and it takes you through the basics. However, if you would like to learn with a live instructor and learn some of the things that you saw here today, I'd be happy to teach you. We do not currently have a standard class for Dynamo, but I am always happy to put a customized lesson plan together and teach you everything I know about Dynamo. And since everything is custom for this, your best bet is to contact your Hagerman and Company sales rep, and we will work together to put a class together for you and your team. My guess is a half day or full day will be enough to get you started, and we can dial it up from there if needed. So all you really need is the desire to learn it, and I can help with the rest. So again, here's my contact information, and thank you very much. I apologize for not leaving too much time for Q&A, but if you typed your questions into the question pane, I'll be sure to go through them and get back to each one of you. And thank you very much. I'll hand it back over here as I open up the question pane.
Report with all the questions that have been asked. That will go to Dan and he can get those answered for you. And if you'll have another opportunity in the survey to ask any other questions that you might have. And we will get back to you as soon as possible. And thank you for attending the webcast today. Have a great day, everyone. Is that all, Dan, or do you want to cover anything before we close?
Yeah, I think that's about it. Again, I appreciate it, and thank you, Ashley. And
Yeah.
thank you, Alice, as well. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay, well, have a great day, everyone.